A warm welcome back, and it's time for our expert sessions. And follow on the expert sessions, we will also have customer story presented after that, MDI story, just to let you know what's coming up after. And then we will have the final with the panel discussion. So coming up first is Jay, founder, CEO, managing partner, Digital Capital Advisors, right?
Bingo.
Plus 25 years. Deal maker, banker, I don't know what to say. So, but I can see though on your CV all the deals, of course, you have made. You can see it up here. It's quite impressive. And I can also see you were coming back from retirement in 2010.
I did. I founded the firm back in 2010. I used to own, I'm actually an old media guy. I started a magazine out of college, owned a number of different media companies. And I always found that the bankers used to call on me, smart, financially oriented, terrific, but not one of them had ever run a company before. So I thought there was a really interesting opportunity to create an investment bank by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. So that's why I came out of retirement.
This is going to be interesting.
Well, let's hope so. As my wife said when she saw this picture, she said, you need a new one. You don't look like that anymore. Thanks, sweetie. So Remco and team, thanks very much for inviting me. Appreciate being here. Appreciate everybody in the audience. This is the part of the presentation you're going to lean back. I know you leaned forward when the financials were discussed. This is the banker talking now. You can relax, have a cup of coffee, and enjoy. So I do have perspective relative to advertising. First of all, ad tech, right? Ad tech, advertising technology. It's really two different scenarios combined to one. The advertising side is really quite interesting in that the technology has really revolutionized, as Remco was talking about earlier, but I think all of you know, has really revolutionized the buying and selling of online advertising. And it's been very unique, it's been very disruptive, and it continues even today. But it's not perfect. It hasn't been perfect from the beginning of time. Advertisers are still asking the same question. Why aren't my advertising dollars being 100% effective? And it sounds like that's new, but it's not. John Wanamaker, one of the famous retailers back in 1919, said, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I just don't know which half it is. So today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about a little bit about media then and now, some shifting demographics, which I think is important. One of my goals today for this little conversation we're having is to ultimately bring it up a notch. You've been in the weeds with the numbers and the granularity of the business. I hope to put a little context around the whole day for you as it relates to this. Programmatic advertising, which is obviously core, vertical integration, consolidation, and then a view on what's coming up. So media then and now. I think Remco had already talked about. Media used to be very simple. Frankly, it was pretty simple when I got out of college. There was no internet, right? There was only a few mediums out there. In fact, my kids today can't believe I go, Dad, you didn't even have an ATM back then? But there was radio, 100 years ago, radio. There's mail. There's newspaper. There were some magazines. The Atlantic, I think, is 170 years old. TV was just one, 4 channels, black and white, became color. Billboards, a little outdoor. But we know the world has changed significantly today, right? When you take a look, I don't need to tell anybody in this audience, take a look at the music business. Spotify, your hometown company, has revolutionized and democratized the online music business. Out of home is becoming a very digitized medium these days. TV is no longer just a single channel. You've got cable TV, paid TV. You've got a number of streaming and a variety of different things. So it's a very complicated world today. And that's just talking about the online side, as Remco and his team talked about earlier. So has it made, is the ad tech landscape a lot simpler than it was? Not really. You saw the slide. I'll show it to you again. This is the one that Remco had put up a little bit earlier. This is the landscape of online media. you've got agencies. The agencies themselves have trading desks. You have DSPs. You have ad networks, a variety of other point solutions like measurement companies, data suppliers, all of them coalescing into what is called the online digital landscape. Very complicated. But the other thing that people really aren't talking too much about is the shifting landscape of the consumer, right? In the United States, the Hispanic population has grown 88% since the year 2000. Think about that, 88%. It's projected, right now 20%, it's projected to be in another 10 to 15 years, 23%. To put that in perspective, African American population is 13%, Asian is 5%. In 15, 20 years, the Asian population is expected to grow in the United States to 10 to 13%, or 10 to 13%, Hispanic to 20 to 25%, and the African American communities are going to remain relatively flat according to the statistics. That means the changing face of the consumers that these brands are trying to reach, and the technology companies like MGI are facilitating the advertising to these individuals is changing, and folks need to be aware of that. Same thing's happening in Europe here. Right? There's been a lot of folks that have come over. The demographic. If you take, let's take a look at the Muslim population in all of Europe. In 2010 was 3.8%. It's projected to be in another 20 years 11.5%. That's not good or bad. It's just different. And you need to understand what your consumer is doing, who they are, what they're doing, what their buying habits are, because the old consumer is very different. And of course, this is what's done it, right? This is what's helped facilitate that responsiveness and the ability to directly target the individual consumer, not the group, but the individual consumer, who then can make a decision whether he or she wants to buy the product or service that's out there, that's being advertised. So the top line's pretty much the same as it's always been. Advertisers want efficiency, transparency, and performance. That's what they've always wanted. John Wanamaker was complaining about it back in 1919. But programmatic advertising has allowed for the level of speed to be able to make that buy, that decisioning buy, is unheard of in the perils of advertising. Number two is they can make, with analytics, they can make decisions to target hyper audiences, right? They can get down to the granular level as it relates to audiences. On the transparency side, the slide I showed you before, the one about the Lumascape, every one of those guys, when they're involved in a campaign, is going to take some money. It's called the ad tech tax. And brands and agencies are tired of the ad tech tax. They want to know about it, because oftentimes it doesn't happen above board. So the transparency side of programmatic advertising has helped to allow that to be more visible. And on the performance side, you can monitor performance, and this is something really unique to advertising, right? Which is you can not only monitor the performance, you can change it, optimize it real time. So has it improved the landscape for efficiency, transparency, and accountability? Well, the answer is yes. Right? Just like the Swedish stock market, the London stock market, NASDAQ, and so forth, everything used to be by hand. Very inefficient, right? Very noisy, too, if you've ever been down in the old stock market where everybody was shouting with pieces of paper. But, you know, looking at the world today, buying and selling stocks, that's what technology does, particularly programmatic side. It looks for inefficiencies, large groups of inefficiencies, and it comes in and solves that problem. And it's done that pretty much for advertising as well, because as Remco quoted some stats earlier in the day, the advertising market is huge. And the digital advertising market is still growing. And I want to just pause and kind of go sideways for a second, because, you know, the guidance has been lowered, but for MGI. But one of the things that's really interesting is online advertising continues to gain greater share of dollars, of those advertising dollars, and that's going to continue because it's more targeted, and it's more efficient, and it's more effective, and hopefully becomes even more transparent than it is today. All right? Again, as I said, an incredibly cluttered marketplace out there of these point solutions. And point solutions, in case you don't know what that phrase is somebody who has an idea for a particular specific product that they will get venture capital backing for, DCO, right, or dynamic creative optimization, which allows for real-time change of created, directed to different audiences in milliseconds, right? That's not a billion-dollar business, but somehow some of these companies have gotten venture capital backing, and they're in there, and they're going to partner with one of the DSPs. They're going to partner with an MGI, and they're going to take their tax, right? A lot of these companies shouldn't even exist, and one of the reasons why there's been mass consolidation that continues today, vertical integration. The reason why? Because there's opportunities out there to pick up some of these companies at a very spectacular price and value that's going to assist the bigger platforms like MGI and others in terms of being able to capture more advertising dollars. So vertical integration I started talking about a second ago. It is a messy landscape out there and has been for a while, right? And consolidation is helping that. The first ones to do it really were obviously the big boys, right? Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. Amazon, as you probably know, their advertising business is $30 billion this year. 3-0. What's really interesting about that is it's really small revenue of the total revenue of Amazon, and particularly AWS. But regardless of that, Google bought DoubleClick about 10 to 15 years ago, an ad-serving technology platform. Amazon bought Seismic. They've been building their own technology in-house. They've had an advantage, which is their walled gardens, right? Which means they've got their own audience that's already identified, that's first-party data, and now in addition to the regular business, they're able to sell them advertising. Small side note, my son happens to work for Walmart Media Group. Walmart's trying to copy Amazon, as all the big box retailers are, because they recognize they have an advantage. They have a captive audience. They have customers, right? It's interesting in that regard. But one thing I think everybody ought to keep in mind that wasn't talked about earlier today, why? Vertical integration, why? Well, because scale matters in the advertising world. Scale matters in the advertising world. Size matters. It doesn't matter when the winds are behind you or in front of you. In fact, they really, against all odds, when the winds are in your face as a business that's an advertising business, when you have scale, that matters. Amazon, Facebook, Meta, and Apple garner 70% of the ad dollars of the digital advertising dollars, which means everybody else is fighting for the other 30%. Go back to scale matters. You get big, you're able to, because the other interesting trend is that agencies, particularly when times are difficult like they are right now, they don't want to talk to 4,500 vendors. They want to talk to a few. They want to do business with a few. So vertical integration like MGI has done and continues to do, and others as well, is really critical because scale matters. It allows you to increase your market share, it gives you downside protection, and downside protection is basically a moat. Now, the challenge is it's not all easy. And I think you heard Paul and everybody else talk about the integration of their technology of the companies they bought. MGI happens to do an extremely good job of integrating, but integrating technology companies is an extremely complex and very difficult proposition, right? So it's not easy to just go out and acquire somebody, a tech company, and roll them into you. There's also obviously the cultural differences as it relates to integrating a company in. And of course, obviously all the governments around the world are paying attention to the monopolies that are being built because scale matters. So most of this I've already talked about, kind of the drivers of consolidation, but clearly the death of the cookie is one, right? Number two is AI, data, and analytics. A lot of companies have had, like MGI, have had AI, artificial intelligence as a platform inside their platform for some time now. But the reality of it is, and one of the things that excites a lot of the analysts in the United States, is they think that AI is going to really revolutionize and take ad tech to the very next level. So we'll see. Hopefully I can come back in a few years and see if it's changed. But the reality of it is it's something that's gotten everybody excited because the opportunities are endless. The macroeconomic environment is conducive for picking up other companies in vertical integration. Remco was talking about a lot of these companies are running out of money, right? And then the shifting regulatory landscape is something that's also driving vertical integration. This is a relatively redundant slide, but one of the interesting piece is that DSPs and SSPs are coming together, which is something that had not happened heretofore. They'd always been apart with somebody in the middle. Now they're coming together. Let's talk a little bit about the M&A landscape. It's been very robust in 21 and 22. Let me back up a half a second and say, the interesting thing about the ad market is there's always opportunities even when things are down, right? When the markets are down. When COVID hit, everything across the planet stopped, right? But what happened? What was the one industry that was like quadrupled in size? E-commerce. Right? Because everybody had to go, everybody had to buy something. They needed their essentials, food, clothing, whatever, right? Alcohol. And what'd they do? They bought everything online. So e-commerce during COVID exploded, right? So following COVID, you had an incredibly active in the ad tech market, M&A marketplace. When things started coming down economically, higher interest rates, borrowing costs going up, all the items and issues that you guys know that have put pressure and reduced the stock prices across the board of most companies, has created an opportunity in the M&A market for private equity groups because the strategic buyers went away because they were all working on cleaning up their own companies, making sure that they were tight on their own budgets, reducing ad spend, sorry to say, right? But private equity had been sitting on the sideline, and now they had no competition. So what's interesting about private equity is I call it the private equity flywheel, right? Because a private equity company, let's look at Equitive, Paris-based ad tech company, right? Bridgepoint Advisors just bought them. Generally, or we can even talk about Simplify. Generally, what happens with a private equity company is they'll come in and buy a relatively large company, a platform company, then they'll put dollars behind that company to grow organically, and then they'll give them money to go grow inorganically. And so as that happens, then they get bigger. And then what happens? Private equity doesn't hold companies forever, 3 to 5 years, off they go. And by and large, in the last 2 years, what's really interesting, what's happened? They've been selling to other private equity groups, bigger ones. And then the cycle continues. Simplify is a classic example of that. It was a small programmatic advertising platform for local. They were bought 8 years ago by Frontier Capital, small private equity group down in Charleston, South Carolina. They grew organically, they grew inorganically. 4 years later, they were sold to GTCR, a much larger private equity group. GTCR did the same thing. 18 months ago, KKR bought them. So even when valuations are down, there's always somebody out there, particularly in a market that is so fragmented, to pick up and consolidate in a vertically integrated way. These are more notable M&A things. So to wrap up, if you want to, you can look at those deals online in the presentation at another time. But looking ahead, so what do we think is going to happen for the rest of the year? Well, you guys know the IPO market is cracked. It's closed. Maybe it's opening a little bit. You're seeing a few companies get out now. But it's relatively closed and will remain closed for some time. There's going to be accelerated development of AI and ad tech, as I said before. Sadly, we don't believe that ad spend is going to increase in any dramatic way over the second half of 2023. I think we're more bullish about 2024 for one particular reason. It's been a while since we've been in this, don't call it a recession, but we have an economic slowdown, and advertising has been reduced, right? It's been a while. But at the end of the day, brands are what? Their job is to sell their product. And they begin spending at some point. They're going to spend. Now, they may not spend if the winds don't shift. They may not explode in their spending, but they're going to spend more than they are right now. And if you look at the history of advertising, both online and offline, you'll see that. In any prolonged downturn, brands started spending because they have to sell their product. There's going to be a continued move towards vertical integration. And one thing that's certainly not going away is obviously government focus on data privacy. So with that, I will say I will change my picture. I promise my wife. And thank you very much.